All right, Rabbi, we'll say good morning. Let us begin. We are continuing in Mir Hashem. In Mishna Yomi, we find ourselves today in Berachos, Perek Vav, chapter 6, and we will be learning Mishnayos Ches and Tes, 8 and 9. Really interesting Mishnayos. So Mishnah Ches says as follows. Achol te'inim anavim v'rimonim. What happens if a person eats figs, figs, grapes, and pomegranates? Mevarich acharin shalosh brachos. The halacha is you bench. Divrei Rabbi Gamliel. Now I will say again in the Mishnah, so shalosh brachos refers to birkas hamazon. So therefore, according to Rabbi Gamliel, something absolutely amazing. He holds that halacha l'maaseh, if you eat figs, grapes, or pomegranates, you have to bench after eating. Now what's the logic here? Remember, the common denominator between figs, grapes, and pomegranates is that they are all part of the Shivas Haminim, the 7 species. And the Bartanura says over here, the Choshu Mishivas Haminim Mevarich Acharav Shalosh Brachos. This is Rabbi Gamliel's position. Anything that is part of the 7 species, by definition, you recite benching after consuming it. The Bartanura discusses the whole drasha for this, which we're not going to get into right now. The Mishnah then goes on. The Chum say, Bracha Achos Me'in Shalosh. The Chum say, no, you don't say Shalosh Brachos. Also, I just want to point out, the way the Mishnah refers to benching is shalosh brachos, 3 brachos. Because remember again, as we actually saw this in Maseches Tainis, although we recite 4 brachos as part of benching, the 4th bracha of Hatov V'Hametiv was instituted later on, right, as a way of giving thanksgiving to Hashem al haruge Beitar, right, for the massacre that occurred in Beitar and the fact that the bodies did not decompose, even though we were unable to go ahead and bury the dead for a long time. So that's why the Mishnah refers to benching in shalosh brachos. The Chum on the other hand say, no, bracha achos me'en shalosh, which literally translates, the Chum say, no, you make 1 bracha that is like 3, or 1 bracha that is a composition of 3. So Rabbi say this refers to the bracha of al ha'etz, the al peri ha'etz. So this concept that we call a bracha achrona ala michya, ala etz ya pri ha'etz, what's interesting about this particular bracha is it takes the elements of the first 3 brachos of benching and combines them into 1 paragraph. That is why it is called al bracha achas me'en shalosh, the 1 bracha that encompasses the dynamic of the 3 brachos of birkas hamazon. So therefore, the position of Chum say is that if you eat peros of Eretz Yisrael, or for that, by the way, it's extended, right? It's extended also to include grain products. Remember now, grain products are also part of the Shivas Haminim, and of course, it's also extended to include wine. So if you consume any of these types of food items, you make a bracha achas me'en shalosh. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Rabbi Akiva says, afilu achal shelek v'humazono. Rabbi Akiva says, even if you ate a shelek, now what's a shelek? It is a cooked vegetable, but that is your meal. Right, so if you're eating a cooked vegetable and that's your meal, mevarich acharav shalosh brachos. You'll bench after that. So therefore, Rabbi say we have 3 different opinions over here. We have the position of Rabbi Gamliel who says that anytime you eat anything from the 7 species, you bench. You have the Chachamim saying no, you bench over bread. Over everything else, you'll say that of the 7 species, you'll make a bracha achas me'in shalosh, an ala eitz, or an ala michya, or an ala gefen. Then you have the position of Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva says, anytime you're eating a meal, you bench. Even if that meal is what? A cooked vegetable. So we'll say, we know, how do we paskin? We paskin like the Chachamim. That Allah L'maisa will recite birkas hamazon over bread, but anything else, let's say of shivas haminim, or grain-based products, or wine, we will recite a bracha achas me'in shalosh, an ala eitz v'yapri ha'etz, ala michya, or al hagefen. We'll say last case in Mishna Ches, interesting case. Hashos semayim litzimo, if a person goes in and is thirsty and drinks water, omer shahakol niyeh, you make a bracha of shahakol. Rabbi Tarfon says no, borei nefashos rabos. So what's this fascinating? Rabbi Tarfon understands that borei nefashos is actually a bracha that is made before drinking water. Not a bracha achrona, but rather what we call a bracha rishona. So we'll say, of course, we know we don't paskin like Rabbi Tarfon, Rather, we pass the Tanakama, and therefore, if a person drinks water because they're thirsty, in fact, they say a Berachos Nefashos beforehand, and ultimately, again, they say a Shahakol beforehand, and a Berachos Nefashos afterwards. I will say the reason why the Mishnah brings down the case of drinking water because you're thirsty is because there are other cases of drinking water where perhaps you may not be obligated to make a bracha. For example, a person goes ahead and drinks water to swallow a pill. So it's an interesting discussion amongst the poskim. Is one obligated to make a shahakol for that consumption? And many of the poskim say no. If a person is only drinking the water to get the pill down, but at the end of the day is not thirsty, that would not drink the water otherwise, then according to many poskim, one would not go ahead and recite a shahakol. Now that's dafka with water. For example, if you're taking drinking orange juice to take down a pill, you would make a bracha no matter what, because the difference with water is water doesn't have a taste benefit, right? There's no taste to water. So therefore, again, if I'm not drinking it because I really want it, because I'm thirsty, then there may not be a bracha. But other liquids which do have a taste benefit, one would make a bracha even if one is only drinking it in order to go ahead and get a pill down. Okay, good. So we'll say that's Mishnah Vav. So Mazel Tov. That concludes Mishnah Perek Vav. We now find ourselves in the beginning of Perek Zayin, 7th chapter of Meseches Berachos. So we'll say Mazel Tov. We're finishing a lot of great stuff today. So says the 7th Perek. So Perek Zayin Mishnah Aleph. Shlosha she'achlu ke'echad is a great case. If 3 people eat a meal together, chayav and lezamin, they form a zimun. So also here the Mishnah is introducing us to the concept of a mezuman. A mezuman, 3 people go ahead and eat their meal together. So ultimately, again, there is an obligation to create a mezuman. Obviously, assuming that they're eating mezuman-worthy foods. Now, interestingly enough, the Gemara says, achal d'mai, umay serisha. A person ate d'mai. Now remember, what's d'mai? Demai is produce that you purchase from an Ama Aretz. Chazal said that when you purchase produce from an Ama Aretz, you have to retithe it. Right? Now, interestingly enough, but remember, the idea is most Amaratzim tithe their produce. It's only because of some who do not that the rabbis made you go back and tithe again. So if you ate Demai, or Meiser Rishon Shenit La Trumaso, or Meiser Rishon from which you removed Truma, or Meiser Sheni Behektish Sheniftu, or if you have Meiser Sheni. Remember again, Meiser Sheni is your tithe. Now remember again, Meiser Rishon is given to the Levi, but even the Levi has to go ahead and remove a section of Truma. Or Meiser Sheni, which is your produce, but you just have to eat it in Yerushalayim, and or Hagdish, or consecrated property, Sheniftu, in this case consecrated food, that was redeemed. Or V'hashamish Sha'achal Kizayis, or a shamish, a waiter, right? The servant who ate a kizayis of bread, or a kusi. Now again, this Mishnah is going with the approach that Bartanura points out that the kusim are gerei emes, that they are true converts. We spoke about the kusim many times, which is this group resettled in Eretz Yisrael by Shalmaneser, the king of Ashur. There was an outbreak of lions, they converted, but there's always a discussion whether or not their conversion was authentic, as they were found to be worshipping idolatry afterwards. The Mishnah over here takes the approach that kusim are legitimate converts. In all of these cases, mizamnin alein. So we'll say, what the Mishnah just did is gave an example of foods that count towards a mezuman. So again, all of these cases, now the only novel case in here is the case of demai, right? Because demai, if you ate demai, you could still participate in a mezuman. Now why is that? The reason for that is because halacha l'maisa, really me'ikar adin, you could rely on the fact that a Ama Aretz, an ignorant person, properly tithes his food. It's an extra chumrah that Chazal imposed that you should retithe it. But if you didn't retithe it, you could assume that the majority tithes. And all of these other cases are just legitimate kosher items, right? The kusi is considered to be a legitimate Jew, and therefore you can make him a zuman. Contrast that with the end of the Mishnah. Aval, achal tevel, if a person ate untithed produce, or the Levi did not separate out Truma from his portion of Meiser Rishon, or you consume Meiser Sheni and Hektish, which were not redeemed, or Shamish Sha'achal Pachos Mikizayis, or if you have a Shamish who ate, right, the waiter ate less than a Kizayis, or a Nachri, a non-Jew, in all of these cases, Ein Mizamnin Alehem. So we'll say this is really fascinating. So it teaches us 2 things. Number 1, Obviously, in order to have a mezumin, what do you need? 3 Jews. So if one of those 3 people is is your shamish who didn't eat a kizayis, or is a non-Jew, then halacha l'maisa, they cannot form a mezumin. What's also interesting about this is as follows, which is, in order to be part of a mezumin, everybody has to be eating quote-unquote kosher food. And kosher food, I don't just mean kosher food that it's actually like ingredient-wise kosher, or not like non-kosher species of animals, but food that it is permitted to consume. That's why, interestingly enough, if halacha l'maisa, one of the people is eating tevel, untithed produce, or one of the person is eating meiser sheni, which has not been redeemed, and they're eating it outside of Jerusalem, outside of Yerushalayim, you cannot go ahead and become part of a Muslim. Or I will say, to contemporize this a little bit, if you have 3 people, 3 Jews, and one of them is eating non-kosher food, they cannot count. You can't make a mezumin like that. So a mezumin essentially is going to need 3 things according to the Mishnah. Number 1, it's got to be 3 Jews, right? Non-Jews don't count towards the mezumin. Number two, they all have to be consuming quote-unquote kosher food. And kosher means that it's also fit, because remember, tevel is technically ingredient-wise kosher, but it's untithed. It has to be fit. And number 3, halacha l'maisa, they have to be consuming a requisite measure, which is the case of the kizayis, which will Amirat Hashem build on a future shem. Also, we'll stop over here for today. Shkayach, everyone.